I had not a clue. You know, a lot of people say that wives know, and we've not found that a lot in the couples we work with. I had not a clue. He walked in, he'd been at a meeting, and I thought someone had died. And I didn't know it was our marriage. And so when he sat down and made his confession, I was absolutely shell-shocked.
Welcome to the Focus on the Family broadcast, helping families thrive.
Well, sadly, surveys show that over 1/3 of marriages have one or both partners admitted to having been involved in extramarital affairs. And we're going to talk about that today. This is Focus on the Family. Your host is Focus President and author Jim Daly. I'm John Fuller, and today a couple who overcame infidelity and found healing, and they're going to offer ways that you can thrive in your marriage.
Let me say, welcome back to Focus on the Family.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
This is a story that, in a situation that is always prevalent in the culture, and certainly in the church too. Now, how long into your marriage before you became a Christian? Who became a Christian first?
Well, I did. I was, so we were living life, and we were in our 20s, and just kind of traveling down that path. And like we said, the intimacy in our relationship was always best friends. That was one of those things and that was kind of almost uncommon in that era. It was more physical back then, I think was what started it. We were best friends. And then getting married out of that. So here I was, I started a small studio, and then I got a call one day from a guy that I was in a band with back in Stockton, said he'd been writing some songs, and hey, how about I come up and we catch up and play some tunes that I had written. He pulls out his guitar and he starts to play these songs about his new love for his Lord Jesus Christ, and that wasn't a part. Now, I had always known there was a God. I was kind of raised in a home that we went to church every now and then, but it wasn't, a relationship.
It wasn't a commitment.
It wasn't a commitment or a relationship that you had with Christ. So this was something that I was kind of searching for. I knew something was missing in my life, and so I knew there was a God, but I just didn't have a relationship. Anyway, he starts singing about Jesus, and I'm wow, so the sessions kind of became more of talk sessions, and then after about the second day, he led me to Christ.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was a real pivotal point in my life. Now, Mona wasn't a Christian at that point, and I'm going to let her pick.
Well, I was going to say,
yeah.
So you come home and you say, Mona, guess what happened to me? And Mona said,
Well, my background was that my family went to church when things were good. And when things were not good, church was left on the back burner.
That's
so God
usually
was,
opposite.
I know.
Why do you think that was?
I don't know. I never heard anything about grace. It was all works-based, and if you weren't good enough, then you lost your salvation and you were going to hell. And so it didn't take very long for me to figure out as a junior higher that I wasn't good enough and I was going to hell. And so I figured they'd convinced me how bad that was. So I figured I might as well have fun here because I knew what was coming. So I had really pretty much rejected anything to do with faith.
Mona, let me make sure, because some people, again, they may not be there yet.
Yeah.
Did you feel like it was unattainable?
Yes.
The bar was just simply too high.
The bar was too high, and I couldn't be good enough.
And guess what, for everybody? That's true. The bar is too high. Perfection.
That's right.
Yeah. That's exactly why we need Jesus Christ.
Exactly
That's what
Absolutely.
he said. He's the one that lifts us up to the bar.
That's
He's
right.
like that adult that puts you as a child up to the pull-up bar, right?
Yeah.
He's the one that gets you there.
Well,
Yes.
I just remember in those early stages when I came home as a Christian going, well, and she's going, well, how can you continue to, because, you can't do that. You're going to, I said, well, I understand this is a relationship that I have with my Savior. This isn't about what everybody else thinks. So in my infancy, I had a vague understanding of what grace was. This is something she had no
I
idea.
did not.
No.
I decided, this is probably 3 or 4 years later, I decided, okay, fine, I'm tired of everybody telling me how wrong I am from both sides.
I just kept saying, read the gospel.
I'm just going to read the Bible. And if it doesn't come through, then I'm done. And so I did read the Bible. And when I got to Romans 7, where Paul says, what I do what I don't want to do. And I went, oh, that's me. And so I said, okay, I will choose to believe this, but you'll have to prove it to me. And he did.
Comes the girl
and
from the 70s.
Yeah. And he did very faithfully. And that's
Yes,
how
he
our
did.
spiritual journey began.
That's
Can
when
I-
we synced up.
Yeah, and let me emphasize that because that happened to me when I was 21. I had made a commitment to Christ at 15, but I wobbled along. I was living without boundaries. But then at 21, it dawned on me. No one challenged me. I wish somebody would have. But I'm in college. I'm reading business books. I'm all these things to prepare for my career. And I remember thinking to myself, I should really read the Bible because if it's
I
a
know,
book
it's a good read.
if it's a book of truth.
Absolutely.
I mean, and I go through all the way in college and read all these other books.
Yep.
Plato. I had the philosophy class, Plato and Aristotle, but it really grabbed me that I can't be a believer without reading the Word.
That's right.
So I better read it. And I appreciate the truth of what you just shared.
Right.
For the skeptics out there listening,
Right.
read it first before you attack. Read that New
Amen.
Testament. Understand the heart of God for you. And what Mona was sharing there, that, you know what? Paul, who was the apostle of the apostles,
Right.
the brilliant one, he himself said he can't live to the standard.
That's right.
And that's the truth of it. I think we've laid that groundwork sufficiently for people to hear your love for each other, even today, even though you went through a dark, dark valley.
We did.
Speak to the lead up to those failures that, Gary, you had. When you think back on it, how many years after you both accepted Christ, you're in church, what was that time gap, and what were the shortcomings? What began to happen
Okay.
that caused a derailment of your commitment?
Man, my chronology, I don't know. It was
About
like
10 years.
Yeah, but it was 20 years married, right?
20 years married, so
Yeah.
about 10 years after I became
Okay,
a
so
believer.
that's where we are. at
Okay,
this
that's
point.
helpful to know.
So we're both in church. We're both going
10
down.
years.
Yeah, and both very active in our own ministries, and that's when it began. And I'll tell you, it was 1993 that I came home, and then that's when I confessed to Mona that I had had an affair. And I need to kind of back up because that was a bomb that was just dropped
Well,
in the
absolutely.
middle of our relationship. And this was an affair with a coworker, but it was also one of Mona's best friends. So it was just just a bomb. It was crazy how what happened in our relationship.
Well, and I think that the question I really want to drive at, Gary, is what pushed you there?
What left
What,
me? Yeah.
what was that hole in
Then
your
let me-
heart?
Okay, let me back up just a little bit. What it ended up happening was this was a person that that I had met in church. So I served in, like I said, we both were going 1,000,000 miles an hour, Mona and I, and very busy with both of our ministries, but not ministries together. We were separate that way. And I served in a worship team. And this was a person that I met on the worship team. And there was no intention to this at all. We were both solid Christians. This was not anything that we were ever, it wasn't there. That wasn't there. But what I didn't know was I truly believed at that point that I was not vulnerable to anything like this. This was never going to happen to me.
So
in
that was
my
the
life.
first false premise.
That is
that
absolutely a
you
lie.
couldn't fall
yeah,
this
that's
way.
that's exactly
Wow.
right. Because and maybe as arrogant as this might sound, is I used to just joke about it. I would just say, I nobody ever was flirty with me or in my life, and so it was like one of those things that I used to joke, say, I'll start resisting temptation the day it stops resisting me, and because it was never going to be an issue. Well, that was absolutely left me so vulnerable. And then with Mona and I doing life just 1,000,000 miles an hour, and her busy in her ministry as well as the kids and the family and the management of all that, and then me building the business and everything else, we didn't take time to prioritize ourselves. That us factor, that was us. We always just kind of took each other for granted, and so, but not in a bad way. It was just we were doing life.
But again,
busy.
let me keep it on the rails here
Uh-huh.
because I think for people to follow this, it's really critical because many people listening right now, it's possible, literally thousands, might be in this same place.
Same
that
exact
you were.
place.
So I want to speak with that tenderness and with that insight coming from you, experiencing it.
Yeah.
A tool for them to help. So.
Well-
This affair went on for 3 years.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to back up to that point where we were going down the path. And what happened was when someone came along and that was a friend and started, would be hanging on my every word. But see, I have messed up. I don't want to leave out a part because we served together in church. And then what ended up happening was she was really well suited for a position that opened up at my company. And Mona and I talked about it, and she applied for the job. And so then she came to work with us. And so
And that was before the
that was
affair.
oh yeah,
Right.
absolutely,
Okay. All
long
right.
before the affair, long before anything. So what happened at that point was, now that we spent maybe an hour together in preparation for the worship team a week, now it was 8 hours a day, and so that friendship just continued to grow and continued to grow and continued to grow. And that was one of those things that you just don't see out there because we became closer and closer friends. And when that person comes along that listens to you and likes you for who you are and hangs on your every word and the whole thing, it starts feeding you emotionally. And I got to be honest, I liked that.
That was attractive to you.
It was very attractive to me. Now I'm playing this justification game in my head about, there's nothing going on, and there wasn't. There was nothing going on inappropriate outside of maybe in my heart because I liked being in the presence of this other person. She was feeding me that way, and that was a dangerous place to be. But I didn't believe it was because there was nothing ever going to happen.
Mona, we're going to come back to you in a
Okay.
moment and
That's
get
all right.
that emotional response when Gary told you what was happening. But let's go back. So
Okay.
she's feeding this appetite in your
Appetite, yeah,
heart.
exactly.
She's affirming you, which every man wakens up to. I mean,
Every
wow,
person
Every
does.
she really likes me.
That's right.
She
You know-
really affirms me.
Yeah.
She
And-
thinks I'm something.
Yeah, exactly. and so when you're sitting there and you think that this is never going to happen, and you start to convince yourself, you are so vulnerable at that point. And if I can speak to the people out there that are at this point, you are in a very dangerous position because what ends up happening is you start to justify putting yourself in this person's path, and I'll get my coffee this morning, but I'm going to go down that path because
Think of that.
I'm going to be going by her office just to say, hey, how's it going, or whatever. And that what happens is it's just one baby bad step after another. It just becomes just a bad decision. I did not wake up one day and say, gee, I think I'll go out and have an affair. Absolutely not. It was just one baby step after another.
Leading into that, then, what was the big rock that fell? I mean, you're doing all these baby steps.
Yeah.
What was the moment
Well,
when it all came
To
apart?
say that there was a moment is all just, I think, shrouded in this justification and stuff that's going on in your head. You're just being so deceived by the enemy at this point, and it's very, very subtle. And I think the song says it best. It's a slow fade because that glance turns into an extended glance, turns into maybe just a touch, and then it's
well,
just,
an acknowledgement that you both
Exactly.
desire each other.
That's right.
And then it's
and let me tell you that's a
over.
huge red flag if
Yeah.
you have a relationship with somebody and saying, and this happened with this relationship, I have to be careful around you. Because if this were different circumstances, and you're saying this, and I feel like I should confess this sin that I'm having about maybe being attracted to this person.
what if you had your senses at that moment? What would you have done differently?
Flee.
Which is exactly what the text says.
That's
The
exactly
scripture
right.
says
There's
that.
no question about it. And that was even after the first. When we fell into the affair, we both knew. We were both Christian people. We both knew that God is very specific about this.
So this continued now for 3 years.
Well, what happened was we fell, and then we both knew that this would just absolutely torpedo both of our lives completely. I would lose my wife, I would lose my family, I would lose my business and ministry, everything. There wasn't anything that wouldn't be touched by this, as with her. And so in our infinite wisdom, because God is very specific about sexual immorality. He says, you flee, you are to flee this. Well, we didn't flee. We just decided that we would resolve to not do this anymore. And so we would just will it out. We wouldn't do this. And then we wouldn't for a long time. And then the season would come when we'd get weak, and then we would fall again. And then it would be, we have to stop this, we have to stop this. But this started this cycle that went on for...
That had to be gut-wrenching.
It was terrible because
Actually.
what happens is you just end up so distanced from God. You're holding God at
Well, that's
arm's
where all
length.
the excuses
That's
start
right.
to pile up. Well, I don't get that kind of attention from Mona. She
I
doesn't.
never blamed her that way. Now I've heard that with
Yeah.
other people, but that was never the case. This was just a selfish decision on my part. But I was battling with this. I didn't want to do this anymore. I think a lot of people, Christian guys, are.
I do remember you being a little angry,
Yeah.
which is very common when someone's in an affair. They'll either be extremely loving or mean.
Yeah.
you hear.
Now, Mona, I want to pull you into the story because the women listening are going, Mona, come on. Why weren't you observing something? What happened for you? It was like you did not know.
I did not know. They were very good at keeping the relationship separate. I thought it was cool that they were good friends. We were all good friends. We were doing life together. And here's where I made some mistakes because I thought Gary was better than that too.
Huh.
And the reality is, no one is. Adultery is an equal opportunity sin. It transcends even spiritual maturity. And so the point was, I used to say, I'd have to catch him literally to ever believe he'd do anything. And I forgot what God said in Jeremiah about our hearts being desperately wicked. See, I believe that about everybody else, but not my husband, and certainly not me, and certainly not somebody famous or really spiritual. And so we did not protect ourselves much.
Mona, I want to be careful, though, because what I'm hearing you say is that you can be bitten if you trust too much, and I don't think that's what you want to say. Or how do you trust but verify, I guess?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you have that trust in your spouse, but you still keep your eyes open to the possibility so your communication is open?
Okay. So what Gary and I do different now is we do not put ourselves in situations where we spend a great deal of time alone with someone of the opposite sex. We don't put ourselves in a position to spend time, not because we think we'll fall in the next 30 minutes, but because that begins an intimate relation, or it can begin an emotionally intimate relationship, which can then follow through into a full-blown affair.
Some call that building hedges
Building
around
hedges.
your relationship. That's what
That's
you're
right.
referring to.
That's right.
So it's not that you necessarily don't trust your spouse. It's let's honor each other by putting these hedges in place
That's
to
right.
make sure we don't fall
And that
in a
falls
moment
back,
of weakness.
It falls back to what I was saying originally about being so vulnerable. You know, it's like don't be thinking that you can't fall. And I think that's one of the best hedges that there can ever be is don't believe that lie. Everybody is capable of this, I think.
So Gary, to be forthright now, there was a cohort, a colleague,
Yes.
who kind of came to you and had observed the behavior.
Yeah. So I'll go back to the story chronologically. It had been going on for like 3 years, but still, you know, here's Gary just in his terror, not confessing, knowing that it needed to get into
In the
light.
cycle, so to speak.
Yeah, in the cycle, so to speak. And after 3 years, the calluses are so deep on your heart, and you just become just hard-hearted in the whole thing. And then, I mean, I hate this part, but I have to say it. Another woman that came along. It was a one-night stand, but it was the 2x4 to Gary's forehead that God used to just beat
Some sense into you?
How could
Reality.
I go so low? You know, I was kind of stuck in a loop in that thing, and this just was one of those. Oh my goodness, how can I? I was just disgusted.
Would it be fair to say it was revealing who you were?
Yeah, exactly.
And that was scary.
And that was
Like
absolutely.
your human appetite.
Yeah, well, you
Absolutely.
start to just convince yourself that I must be okay back in this terrible behavior, and it was just God cleaning me out, just bam. And I mean, and so at that point, and even though at that point I knew something had to be done, and I knew I needed to confess and get this into the light so the enemy would lose his power in all
Right.
of this. And so what ended up happening was this, like you were telling me about this gentleman, young man, worked for us as well, very spiritually wise beyond his years. And he caught me coming in to work one morning and said, "Hey, I need to talk to you," and pulled me into the studio, pulled the door closed, and said, "Gary, I know that there's something going on here, and you really need to do something about this."
Wow.
And then one step further, and if you don't, I will. and I need to say that because so many people hear my testimony and the offended spouse will go home and say, "Well, at least Gary came home and you know, he repented." And
But you were forced into
I
it.
was
That's right, you
busted.
got
You would have
shot.
still been in the
Yeah.
spin cycle
Yeah,
for some period
in
of time.
terror, you know, of this ever coming out. So, yeah.
Mona, I mean, we have loaded the situation for you to speak to the pain in your heart the day that Gary comes home or wherever it was. Describe that. We heard it in the opening, that something you knew, you had that intuition that something was wrong.
I saw it on his face. I saw it in how he stood in the doorway. And I knew he'd met with the pastor, and I thought, oh my goodness, our pastor's dropped dead. But then he confessed, and I remember other names going through my head, and because when I asked who. But when he said her name, I knew it. I also knew that this was the end of a part of my life as I'd known it, that this was something huge. I didn't have words for it. I do now. I didn't realize what a trauma the revelation of infidelity is. And so I was certainly in that traumatized state. The pain was overwhelming, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit more later. But at that point, I was pretty numb, didn't know what I wanted to do. When he told me about the one-night stand, at that moment, and this was a Holy Spirit thing in my opinion, at the moment he told me, I knew that God had allowed that so he could see how deeply into sin he'd fallen.
Now that's incredible. I mean, what you're saying there takes incredible maturity, that you saw that as a tool that God used in a horrible
that
situation.
wasn't me. I mean, I just knew that.
Mona,
Yeah.
I need to press you though for that emotion. I mean, you're giving a great police account of what was going on, but my goodness, how did you feel?
Overwhelmed, pain, shock. I was incapacitated with pain for several months, actually. Gary asked me if I wanted a divorce. I didn't know what I wanted. He asked me if I wanted to go to counseling. I said, whatever for. The only answer to this is that it never happened, and no counselor can do that. I was absolutely hopeless. There was not one part of me that thought we could save our marriage. It was over. It was done. I was going to lose my best friend. But while Gary was in the affair, I had spent those 3 years growing in my relationship with the Lord. And so I knew I would face the Lord, and he would say, what'd you do with this, Mona? And I didn't, like I said, I didn't think we'd heal, but I knew I would have to say, Lord, I tried.
Check the box.
I would have to check the box. And so I hung around to try because I knew that's what God wanted me to do.
Mona, we have a program called Hope Restored for couples that were right in your situation, and it has an incredible post 2-year 81% success rate. I'm really pleased with Dr. Bob Pauls, who runs the program there. He just does a fantastic job. And what I want to say about this right now, though, is here's the question for the intake. And it's critical, and I want your response to it. They'll ask couples that are struggling like you were, do you believe God can work a miracle in your marriage? And it's the critical question, because if the spouses, if they can say yes, but you don't, the Lord, he's the only one if you knew my husband. But just that little crack of hope is what's needed. Is that where you were at? You had that little bit of hope that maybe?
Perhaps. I really don't have an honest answer to that, because you have to realize in that traumatized state, nothing's working right, even in your brain. You can't think straight. It's like the widow in the ER who was just told her husband dropped dead. That's the depth of this wound. I must have had some little glimmer of hope. I believed God could do a miracle, no problem. Did I believe he would do it in me and Gary? I'm not
Bigger
sure.
question.
Bigger question.
Man, we're at the end of the program today, but we've got to stick with it. And, I think people like me, we're appreciating the openness. This is how the church heals.
Yes.
By hearing
Amen.
stories like this. Some of you might be mad at Gary. I get that. Some of you are pulling for
Come back
Mona.
tomorrow, please.
But we need to hear the rest of that story, because it's not about either one of you in the big picture. It's about God's work in your life.
Amen.
And I think that's the reason that we need to come back and give God the glory for repairing a brokenness that only he could repair. And I am grateful for the way you've approached this. Let me again mention Hope Restored. That is a program, if you are hearing this and you're in tears right now and you're feeling the pain because you're living the pain, maybe not all the exact details, would you invest in your marriage? Would you honor the Lord by doing what needs to be done to save it? Call us here at Focus on the Family. Literally, this is happening hundreds of times this year. Couples are going to come to Hope Restored and be restored in the name of Christ. And we are grateful to you when you say, yes, I will try. And for those who are supporting the ministry, this is it. If you want to stand up and be counted and be a part of helping couples, especially Christians, to say, I believe in God. I think God can do that miracle. Be a part of the team. I mean, let's get this done. Let's reduce the divorce rate within the church by 15, 20, 25%, maybe more. That's a worthy goal, and I would encourage you to consider helping us financially and praying for us in the work of Focus on the Family.
Hey, I'm John Fuller, and thanks for watching. Get more info about Focus over here and more from our guests over there, and be sure to subscribe to our channel as well.